On the 24th of February 1986, police in Talladega, Alabama, forced entry into the home of 24-year-old Sherry Weathers. The profoundly deaf mother of two had not turned up to school for nearly a week, and the reason soon became clear. Sherry and her two young children had been strangled to death and piled on top of each other in the shape of a cross.
The utter callousness of it, of not only killing them, strangling them, but then posing them to be discovered. It's an act of a vile human being.
The horrific scene will forever be etched in the minds of the two detectives who worked on the case.
When you see something like that, you can't help but think about your own child. This could happen to my child, too.
And so now you know you got to do everything you possibly do to bring this person to justice.
The killer was a 31-year-old artist named Daniel Siebert, and his macabre masterpiece was far from complete. Two more bodies would soon be discovered, but the police had no idea where to find him.
He was in the wind. We didn't know where he was, but we knew that somebody was going to die until he was caught.
Daniel Siebert had made his mark as one of the world's most evil killers. When 33-year-old Daniel Siebert was sentenced to death for the murder of Linda Jarman on the 17th of April 1987, it signaled the end of the killer's cold-blooded career. On the 19th of August, he received a second death sentence for the murders of Sherry Weathers and her two children. Officially found guilty of 5 murders, authorities believe that Siebert was responsible for many other deaths across the U.S. in the mid-1980s. Homicide detective Eugene Jacks was part of the policing team who hunted the killer for over 6 months before his dramatic arrest in September 1986.
He killed Sherry because she was deaf, and she would never amount to anything because she was deaf. He killed those two little boys because their mother was dead, and they would never amount to anything because they wouldn't have a mother. He killed Linda Jarman to get her car. He says he killed Linda Odom because she was a racist. I think he just killed people because he liked to kill people.
In a series of interviews with the killer, Eugene learned a lot about just how callous Daniel Siebert could be.
If you didn't know what kind of monster he really was, you could actually like him, but he had no compassion for anyone, no feelings for anyone. These people didn't matter to him, not at all. He didn't hate them. He just didn't have any feelings for them, none whatsoever.
This killer's story begins in Mattoon, Illinois, a small city in America's Midwest.
Siebert was born in 1954, so these were the post-war years in the US. The economy was starting to boom. We have the idea of the American dream, but I think when we look behind closed doors at his family life, it was anything but that. There are reports of abuse from his father towards his mother and towards him.
Father was an aggressive man. He mistreated both Danny and his mother.
He was a man who was violent and abusive and controlling. And this is the role model of masculinity that Siebert grows up with. So I think that there is a real sense of shame that Siebert maintains throughout his life. And having been victimized, I think that Siebert was always trying to turn the tables and be the aggressor.
Siebert's parents divorced in 1968, just a month before his 14th birthday. The young man's life began to spiral out of control.
He became addicted to drugs. He had got into prostitution, himself acting as a male prostitute.
I think there were several warning signs in Siebert's childhood and adolescence that point towards a very troubled individual. He's somebody who could not make relationships work with other people. He didn't relate to his peers particularly well. There was a feeling of rejection from the family environment. And it's this sense of isolation and later the choice to be isolated, which is something that's very concerning for me.
There was nothing about him that could be described as ordered. He was like a Catherine wheel, going round and round in every single direction, a firework.
Aged 18 and looking for some stability in his life, Siebert enrolled with the military in 1972.
Siebert's decision to try and join the Marines is a really, really interesting part of this case because it's what that decision symbolises. The Marines symbolise this alpha male, this toughness, this kind of real American hero type persona. And I think Siebert wanted to try and live up to that.
Unfortunately, he couldn't deal with the order the Marines brought him. And quickly, well, within a year, went absent without leave.
After being dishonourably discharged from the Marines, Siebert was once again at a loose end. But the troubled young man had a hidden talent that soon began to flourish.
One thing that Siebert excelled at was as an artist. It was the only thing he was good at.
You can tell by looking at some of his drawings, it was just, I think he was expressing his fantasies in his drawings. That's how he got started with that. He was quite a person. I mean, he had an engaging personality. Enjoyable to talk with, really. If you didn't know what kind of person he was down deep, you would actually enjoy sitting and talking with him.
But life for the charming young artist remained difficult.
Between 1972 and 1978, he was principally based in Los Angeles. And there were a series of offences, drug offences, some violence, charges of battery. It was a life lived on the edge, on the fringes of society and on the fringes of the law.
By January 1979, 24-year-old Siebert was living in Las Vegas. He was in a relationship with a male partner. It was reportedly an abusive one that ended with him fatally stabbing his lover.
This homicide was a particularly vicious one because Siebert stabbed his partner 29 times. Now, for me, that means that he has made that decision 29 times to put the knife in again. This was somebody who knew what they were doing, they knew what they were doing was wrong, and they chose to do it anyway.
Despite the viciousness of the slaying, at his subsequent trial, Siebert was charged with manslaughter, not murder.
Siebert insisted that it was a matter of self-defense. How it can be to stab someone that many times is slightly beyond me. But it did seek to throw into doubt whether it was a premeditated murder, and therefore added strength to the argument that it was a crime of passion.
I think because this was a homosexual relationship, there was a tendency for the court to just want to accept that narrative and put this case to bed because there was still stigma around homosexuality in the US at this time. And I think that was perhaps what drove this offence in the first place, because a lot of violence has its roots in shame. I think Siebert was fundamentally ashamed of who he was. He never accepted who he was. He never felt that society would accept him for his true identity. So I think this early offence is so important, and the criminal justice system's reaction to it was just not good enough.
Siebert was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but after serving just 2, he escaped while on work detail in December 1981.
Now, we really do have a lethal weapon waiting to go off. While he's on the run, he kidnaps a woman at gunpoint in San Francisco, and she only escapes by jumping out of the moving car on the Golden Gate Bridge. It is a remarkable escape, because in my own mind, I'm not the slightest doubt that he intended to kill her.
Siebert was recaptured the following day in nearby Oakland and returned to prison. An extra year was added to his sentence, but in 1985, he was freed on parole on the proviso that he would return to court to face charges for the abduction and assault he'd committed during his brief escape. Due to attend court in San Francisco in December 1985, Siebert didn't turn up. His next known whereabouts were over 800 miles away in Tucson, Arizona, where he was found hitchhiking and heading east.
But now, Daniel Siebert is not calling himself Daniel Siebert, he's calling himself Daniel Spence. He's given a lift by a man called Donald Hedren, who is on his way to Alabama. Before the journey comes to an end, Donald has offered Spence a post as a volunteer at the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, in which Hedren works.
Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind is a big part of the Talladega community. It's actually a community of its own, or a family of its own, you might say.
And he has, superficially at least, the perfect cover. Artistic young man, happy to volunteer at an institute for those with deafness and blindness.
Leaving his troubles in California far behind him, Siebert settled down in Talladega, Alabama in January 1986. Working at the AIDB, he had a new identity and a new community of friends.
After he arrived here, people realized that he was an accomplished artist, and he was asked to do a mural at AIDB, which he did. And that's one of the reasons he stayed here for a while, was doing that mural.
Once again, he hid in plain sight. The affable art volunteer, friend of Donald, welcome in the Institute. And then, and it's almost heartbreaking, he meets Sherry Ann Weathers, a 24-year-old deaf mother of 2 small boys, and they form a relationship.
A new circle of friends had welcomed 31-year-old Daniel Siebert into their lives with open arms. But they had no idea they'd allowed a brutal killer into their close-knit community. Siebert spent much of his time at the apartment of his new girlfriend, 24-year-old Sherry Weathers. By the 24th of February, Sherry, a single mother of 2, hadn't turned up at the school for almost a week. Her concerned friends contacted the authorities.
In February 1986, the police department received a call for a welfare check at Sunrise Apartments in Talladega. Police was dispatched. Officer Tom Bowerman was the first on the scene. When he entered Sherry Weathers' apartment, he discovered the bodies of Sherry Weathers and the 2 boys. He immediately backed out, locked the door, and called for investigation.
Eugene was joined on the case by an investigator from the district attorney's office, Dennis Surratt.
We arrived at the apartments, and the police department had already had the scene roped off. And we met the other investigators, went into the apartment, and as you walk into the room, there's a bedroom, and then there's a living room, and there's a kitchen. And right in the center of the living room and the kitchen, you see 3 bodies.
It's quite horrible. I haven't forgotten it after all these years. One of the next door neighbors had heard the 2 little boys playing in a tub. He got them out of the bed. He strangled the 2 little boys.
He actually woke them up because they were in bed asleep. He wanted them to know that they were being killed. He wanted them to feel that fear.
And he stacked their bodies on top of the mother.
It looked like it formed a cross. That's my first impression.
Sherry Weathers and her 2 sons, 5-year-old Chad and 4-year-old Joseph, had been strangled to death 5 days earlier on the 19th of February. It was a sickening scene, even for seasoned detectives, but the team knew they needed to stay professional and not let their emotions get in the way of their police work.
You know the minute you walk into that scene, you know this is a death penalty case. And you know things have to be done differently. Everything has to be perfect, everything has to be exact, everything has to be documented. I's dotted, T's crossed, because you know where this is headed to. Because you know a murder of 2 or more is going to be a death penalty case. And then the emotional part hits you, you know, this is a young mother. This is 2 young children had their lives ahead of them. What kind of person would do this. I mean, emotionally it hits you. That's the second thing. After reality is what you got, then emotionally you're hit, you know, especially if you have children.
When you see something like that, you can't help but think about your own child. This could happen to my child too. It's something that you just don't forget about it.
Just as the two investigators were getting to grips with their harrowing day, some more worrying news came in.
We're in the middle of processing that scene. We'd been there probably 2 or 3 hours processing the scene for evidence. And then we were notified that Linda Jarman, who was a friend of Sherry Weathers, she did not show up for classes that day.
She lived in an adjoining apartment, not to this building, but to the next building. So Dennis and I went to her apartment, and we discovered her on the bed in the bedroom, and she'd been strangled.
33-year-old Linda Jarman, a deaf teacher at the same institute where Sherry was a student, had been murdered in cold blood.
He used a sock and just strangled her in her own bed. Of course, most people don't know what a VCR is these days and times, but back in those days, VCR was worth some money, so he stole her VCR in order to get money to travel further.
Linda Jarman's cream-colored car was also missing. The team would report their findings to former Talladega County District Attorney Robert Rumsey.
The evidence would show that after he strangled Sherry and Chad and Joey, that he went to Linda Jarman's apartment telling her that he had had a fight with Sherry and could he sleep on her couch. When she went back to bed and went to sleep, then he went in and he strangled her to get her car to leave.
After speaking to acquaintances and colleagues of Sherry and Linda, the detectives soon had a number one suspect who they discovered had been using a different alias.
At that point, we learned the name Daniel Spence from the people at the school. And we start running him in the computer to see if we find out Daniel Spence, who he is, where is he, everything we could find out. And it's determined that his name is actually Daniel Lee Siebert.
Once we developed him as a suspect and got his true identity, we'd put a nationwide pickup out on Daniel Siebert and Linda Jarman's car. He quickly became the prime suspect because Daniel Spence wasn't here and Linda Jarman's car was gone.
As the duo headed to Siebert's apartment building, they soon discovered there was another potential victim.
So we go knocking on the door, and there's no answer at the door. A neighbor comes out and says, "Why are you here?" I said, "We're looking to see Mr. Siebert." He said, "Well, he's not here." He said, "But I got to tell you, my girlfriend's missing." "Well, who's your girlfriend?" "It's Linda Odom." "How long she been missing?" "Oh, 2 days. I hadn't seen her. She hadn't been home." "Well, do you know if she's ever connected with this guy here, Mr. Siebert?" "Yeah, they're kind of friends." "Well, you need to go to the police department and file a report."
In the space of 24 hours, 4 people had been found dead and another was missing. The investigators needed to find Daniel Siebert fast. And they soon had word from authorities over 350 miles north of Talladega.
We received information from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, that they had located Linda Jarman's car right off the interstate in Elizabethtown. That's when Dennis and I left here to go there to process the car for fingerprints and physical evidence.
And so they take us to the scene, and we go up an embankment from where the car was, and we find a campsite. We uncover a campsite. And Eugene Ryer, we find identification to the boys. We find information on Sherry Weathers and Linda Jarman all at that campsite. So we're fairly certain at this time we're on the right trail.
It was a huge breakthrough that confirmed Daniel Siebert was their man.
We got Daniel Siebert's fingerprints out of the car. Plus other evidence we knew that tied to him, the type of cigarettes he smoked and the type of chewing gum that he chewed. We recovered photographs of women and children, women's cosmetics.
There were also some quite chilling items at this campsite. There were photos of the Weathers family, there were drawings of the Weathers family, and I think this emphasis on those victims is so significant in this case. This young mother and her 2 children seem to have quite a lot of importance for Siebert, because I think that he didn't feel they deserved to be alive. These boys were happy, they were loved and cared for by their mother. I think he felt a real sense of envy and resentment towards them. It was something that he wanted to relive, and I think those 3 murders of Sherry Weathers and her 2 children were the murders he was most proud of.
Despite being sure Siebert was responsible for at least 4 murders, the dangerous killer remained undetected.
Dennis and Eugene, both of them are excellent processors. They go and they're in Kentucky for quite a while, so they were up there several days, and he's in the wind. We didn't know where he was, but we knew that somebody's gonna die until he was caught.
In Linda's car, Eugene and Dennis had recovered an address book belonging to 31-year-old Siebert, which would eventually prove to be an important find.
I had one investigator. Her main job, I'd say, in this investigation was to stay in contact with known associates of Siebert. She had built a rapport with the girlfriend of Siebert's out there, and she promised that if she heard from him, she would call.
With every day that passed, the investigators knew Siebert could strike again at any moment.
Each day when you went to work, the first thing you did was start checking tips and leads on the possibility of where Siebert was. There wasn't a day that went by that you didn't do something on the Siebert case.
I don't know how many miles that we put on cars going from here to there to check out leads or information on Siebert or some of his friends or this, that, and the other. I mean, Lord, there's no telling.
As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Siebert's location remained a mystery. The investigators desperately searched in vain. But in reality, he was over 900 miles from Talladega, Alabama, in New Jersey, and was about to claim another victim, 57-year-old tour guide Beatrice McDougal.
Daniel Siebert was in Atlantic City, staying in a hotel. On March 8th of 1986, walks by a room of a Mrs. McDougal that was a tour guide. She was fixing up for a reception for a hospitality room.
He would have deduced fairly quickly that she's a tour guide, so she's likely to have some cash on her.
Siebert was determined to get his hands on Beatrice's money by any means necessary.
And he goes in there and kills her. We don't know at that point that it's Siebert, but he's off and in the wind, and we ain't got a clue where he is after that. He just drops off the radar.
Siebert had stabbed Beatrice twice in the stomach and strangled her to death in an opportunistic attack.
I think that there is just no regard for the rights or the feelings of other people. It's all about him. He needs money at this point in time because he's on the run. He also wants to kill any potential witness to this crime of theft. So her life was just not considered valuable by him.
As Siebert remained undetected, the bad news continued for investigators in Alabama. On the 30th of March 1986, another victim of the 31-year-old artist would be discovered.
We're all actually at the DA's office working on another case, and we get a call that we've got a body. And just outside of Talladega, there's a little cemetery on the left-hand side of Alabama Highway 21. And there we find a skeletonized body. No question, it's been there for a long time. Decomposition has already come and gone. And we sift through everything. She's not buried or anything. She's been laid on top of the ground. We know it's a female, and that's all we know. And we sift through the pine straw and everything, looking for all the bones, the teeth, and this, that, and the other that we could find to identify. And ultimately, she is identified as Linda Odom, the girl that was missing from the next door neighbor of Siebert.
The timeline suggested that 32-year-old cocktail waitress Linda Odom was Siebert's first victim. Siebert strangled Linda on the 19th of February 1986, meaning he'd killed 5 people on that one day.
Linda's body was taken to Siebert's apartment, and he disposes of the body by lowering it in sheets out of the window and then taking it to a nearby cemetery to dispose of it. And interestingly, Siebert said that when he was disposing of Linda's body, he started punching her. I mean, she was obviously dead at this point in time, but I think that was something that enhanced his feelings of control over this victim. And I think that sense of rage as well that he expresses at this point in time, the way that he's seeing this community who are so welcoming, who are so inclusive, who are loving towards one another, this is something that he feels he was entitled to when he was younger, something that he never had. And these people don't deserve it, according to him. So I think that's what's underlying all of this behaviour.
This is a young girl. She didn't deserve what happened to her, but she just dumped in the cemetery. That kind of hurts your heart that somebody is so cruel to do something like that.
What the detectives in Alabama didn't know is that by now, Siebert was in prison in New Jersey, serving 61 days for assaulting a woman. When he was arrested for the altercation, he used the stolen Social Security card of murdered 5-year-old Chad Weathers as identification. This meant that no one had made the link between Siebert and any of the murders.
So during the time that Siebert was on the run, he actually used the identities of Sherry Weathers' 2 boys to gain new identification. And at this point in time, it was relatively easy to do that, to use a child's identity to get a social security number. But I think that the significance of this is more than just a practicality. I think there is something much more meaningful going on here. By possessing these children's names, by presenting yourself as them, you are owning them, you are possessing them, they are yours. And it's that extension of control over your victims.
After serving his time for the assault, Siebert was in police custody again in June 1986, this time in Virginia.
This young officer stops Siebert, and in the car he finds ropes and knives, ladies' belongings, photographs, just all types of things that just made him very suspicious of this man.
They checked the car and it was stolen. So he was arrested for car theft, being in possession of the stolen car. He was using the identity of Joey Weathers, using the Social Security card as identification. He made bond and he was gone.
Siebert was incredibly cunning, incredibly manipulative. I think he was well aware of the fact that law enforcement wasn't particularly well joined up in terms of interstate communication and sharing of information at this time. And I think he truly did take advantage of that.
In August, Siebert was yet again in another state, Maryland. He assaulted a woman in Baltimore, but wasn't captured by the police. He then headed back west towards Nashville, Tennessee. The investigators in Alabama still had no idea where he was, but a breakthrough was on the horizon. Detectives who'd reached out to people listed in Siebert's address book had been contacted by one of his ex-girlfriends in Nevada. She had news that would finally crack the case.
This lady calls from out there and says that she had just spoken with Danny Siebert on the phone. And he told her what time it was where he was at. And she could hear thunder. And it was raining. So the investigator came and then told the rest of us about the call and that it was raining at that particular time.
With very little information, the investigators tried to trace the source of Siebert's call.
Said it was not easy to trace telephone calls, but they told us if we had any idea where he was, it would make it a lot easier. Otherwise, it could take 3 weeks to a month to trace it. I told the investigator, go call the National Weather Service, find out where it's raining in that time zone. It was raining in Tennessee. That was it in that time zone. We were able to use that information and trace the telephone call to Hurricane Mills in Tennessee to a little convenience store restaurant there.
It was a stunning revelation. detectives could now pinpoint Siebert to the small community of Hurricane Mills, Tennessee, 70 miles west of Nashville.
So I called the district attorney, told him we're going to Tennessee. He said, okay, I'm coming with you.
There's no question we were keyed up because we spent 6 months and no telling how many trips, not me, but how many trips with the investigators and stuff had gone running down every little lead that they could come up with, which really had proved fruitless. But this is a live hit now.
So we all loaded up in cars, headed to Tennessee. I called TBI, which is Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. This is what we got going on. We've got him traced to this location, and we're headed that way.
After 6.5 months of searching for Siebert, the anticipation of his arrest was at the forefront of the detectives' minds.
The journey up there was, it's almost like waiting for your birthday party. We were all extremely excited.
Well, by the time we got there, it was late night, and we decided not to do anything but send one investigator in there to see if they could see anything to this search first, because you had this service station where the call was from, and then you had a restaurant up here, and then you had another filling station, a restaurant up here. So one investigator went in, kind of knew the owner, and said, yeah, he's been painting some signs for me, and he'll be in here in the morning to collect his check.
It would be a sleepless night for the arresting officers.
Everybody's upbeat. Everybody's tired, but everybody's upbeat. And I don't think a single one of us took a nap that night out there on the road, because we were just on the roadway, waiting for morning.
The following morning, the 5th of September 1986, the team were ready to pounce as dawn broke over Hurricane Mills.
It's hard to describe what it was like sitting there waiting for him to come around the building, but I'd always wondered if I'd recognize him when I saw him. When he rounded the corner of that building, there was no doubt in my mind, that's him. As soon as he went in the door, Dennis and I were out the door. We went in behind him. He wasn't there. Scared us to death. We just looked at the clerk, where is he? And she pointed to the restroom. And we went in, and TBI and the captain went in and arrested him in the men's room. And his only question to us was, how'd y'all find me?
I mean, he's got about 6 weapons just aimed at him, and he's caught with his pants down, basically. We seized his backpack. We found where he'd been staying in a car, a wrecked out car behind the station. And he is immediately taken to the court in Tennessee. And we contacted our governor and asked her for her plane to fly him back.
Finally, Daniel Siebert was in police custody. He would never be free again.
I mean, man alive, you can't imagine the relief you feel. We've got him. He's not going to hurt anybody else. And there again, you're thinking of Sherry, and you're thinking of the babies, and Linda, and Linda Odom. You're thinking about them. Okay, we can put everybody to rest now. And it's the best feeling in the world.
The police had their man, but the job was far from done. Detectives were certain he was responsible for the murders of 5 people in the small community. Linda Odom, Linda Jarman, Sherry Weathers, and her 2 sons, Chad and Joey. Investigators had stacks of evidence against Siebert, but they were hoping an interview with the 32-year-old would uncover even more secrets.
It was tense for me, and I'm sure it was for the captain, because we were wanting to get a confession. This was the end of a long, hard battle for us, and we wanted him to admit what he had done.
Siebert told Eugene about the 5 murders he'd committed on the 19th of February 1986, and also confessed to the killing of Beatrice McDougal in Atlantic City on the 8th of March. He showed no remorse for any of the murders.
He wasn't concerned at all. Showed no emotion whatsoever. Never shed a tear. You could tell there was no concern in him about what he had done. And if we had released him right there, he'd have done it again in a few days, because he had no remorse whatsoever for what he'd done. I've told people want to know how he felt about his victims. He didn't feel about his victims. He had no feelings for them one way or the other. He had no feelings for anyone. I don't know that he really felt anything about himself, to be honest with you. He had no feelings.
I think he was a psychopath. I think he demonstrated every normal, or if you can use the word normal when applied to a psychopath, every possible psychopathic tendency, an utter lack of remorse, an utter lack of conscience, an utter lack of empathy with other people. They were simply objects.
Siebert also confessed to another murder that predated any of the other 6, whilst he was lodging with Donald Hendron in Alabama.
It's early February 1986. Donald Hendron's asleep. Siebert gets out of bed and borrows Donald's car and picks up a girl called Cheryl Evans. She's working as a prostitute in Birmingham and Alabama.
He kidnapped her, robbed her, and killed her, and carried her body to Ohatchee and dumped it in a roadside garbage dump. And then just returned the car like nothing had happened.
That brought the tally of victims to 7, but Eugene was certain there was still more. He had uncovered a telling piece of evidence when searching Siebert's home back in February.
In his apartment, I'd found a road atlas. I'd gone through the road atlas, and out on the West Coast, he had X's with zeros, X's and zeros, and he just had X's. I asked him about those, and he said every place that there was an X with a circle around it is where he had killed someone, and just the X's were robberies. I contacted each of these jurisdictions, and sure enough, each place that there was an X with a circle, they had recovered a body.
This is basically Siebert's commemoration of the murders that he's committed. I think every time he looked at that map, he would have felt powerful, he would have felt superior. And we do often see this in cases of serial killers.
Siebert confessed to killing 3 sex workers in Nevada and California in late 1985.
The fact that he's targeted sex workers is really significant for me because he's preying upon these women's vulnerabilities. He's well aware that society does not value these individuals as much as it values others, and therefore he has access to them, he has the opportunity to harm them.
He was also indicted for the murder of Beatrice McDougall, but never went to trial for this. Despite admitting to as many as 13 murders, detectives could only link 10 victims to the 32-year-old. But for his impending trials, Siebert would only be indicted for the murders of the 5 that had been thoroughly investigated in Alabama.
There was 5 homicides. Linda Jarman was a capital case because it was murdered during the commission of a robbery or a theft of getting a car. Sherry Weathers, Chad, and Joey was a capital case because it was murder of 2 or more people pursuant to a common plan, scheme, or design. Linda Odom was not a capital case. He pled guilty to Linda Odom after all of this life sentence.
During 3 trials over the course of 5 months between March and August 1987, Siebert was found guilty of all 5 murders and sentenced to death twice.
I've probably tried 30 death penalty cases or more, but this one, it's just the magnitude of it and what makes another human being go do something like this. I mean, you got a woman that's deaf that he's intimate with, a 4 and 5-year-old who he wakes up from their sleep to strangle, goes to another deaf woman and kills her just to get her car to get out of there. I mean, just stick in your mind, it'll be there on my deathbed.
I think the sentences that he received were appropriate. I think he committed the most serious of crimes, so that deserves the most serious of sentence. But I think if we were to ask his victims' families, they're not going to have their loved ones brought back. I think they have achieved some sense of justice, but at the same time, I think they were asking a lot of questions as to how this man had slipped off the radar of the authorities. This man had committed a homicide in 1979, and he went on to commit more. So could more have been done to prevent that?
I think one of the things that always moves me most about this story is that when he was asked about the killing of Sherry Ann and the boys, he said Sherry didn't have anything to say, Joey didn't have anything to say, Chad didn't have anything to say, And I don't have anything to say. If there's anything that could be more heartless, more utterly revolting, more depraved than that remark, I have yet to hear it. And this is a man who snuffed out the life of a deaf 24-year-old mother and her two children aged 5 and 4. It is utterly monstrous.
In August 1987, Daniel Siebert began his death row sentence. For 18 months, the case had consumed the investigators who had worked on it. Now they could breathe a sigh of relief.
I still think about those 2 little boys. And always will, I'm sure. I'm sure Dennis and other investigators do too, because they all had children too.
I don't know what it is, but I know he's a psychotic killer. And had he not been taken in Tennessee, that's what's so outstanding about the police work. Had he not been taken in Tennessee, I don't know whether it would have been Arkansas, Oklahoma, Nevada, Utah, or California, but somebody else would have died. He wasn't through.
After numerous unsuccessful appeals throughout the years, 53-year-old Siebert remained on death row for almost 21 years.
On April 22nd, 2008, Daniel Siebert died, but not from lethal injection, from pancreatic cancer, natural causes. In the end, he escaped the death penalty.
I mean, this was a personal type of crime. This is not something that you're standing 30 feet away and shoot somebody. This is someone you put your hands around their neck and choke the life out of them. That's bad. Think about that. Because it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes to do that to someone. And you're sitting there and you got your hands around their neck and you're taking the life from them. You got to be enjoying that, otherwise you wouldn't do it that way. And if you're enjoying something like that, man, you are bad. And I just wish we had got to electrocute him. I think we felt we were cheated for that.
Daniel Siebert was linked to at least 10 murders and was convicted of 5. But he never tried to justify his reason for killing people.
For me, what makes Siebert one of the world's most evil killers is the degree of manipulativeness that he was able to exercise. He was able to come across as an individual with feelings, as an individual who cared about others, but those feelings were not genuine at all. They were simply a performance.
He was an absolute monster. He was a horrible person. He really was. And that's what comes to mind anytime anyone mentions his name. He was a monster.
Daniel Siebert was a callous killer who felt no remorse. To choke the life out of 2 children simply because he felt they would never amount to much is a cold-blooded act that cannot be forgiven. We may never know exactly how many lives he took, but Siebert's death means he can no longer harm anyone and will forever be remembered as one of the world's most evil killers. On the 3rd of November 2016, police searching for a missing couple at a property in Woodruff, South Carolina, made an incredible discovery.
How are you, honey? This is bolt cutters.
30-year-old Kayla Brown had been chained up in a metal storage container for 65 days. Her boyfriend, Charlie Carver, had been shot dead.
And the coroner came up and said that they had positive ID that it was Charlie. That was a hard time. You just don't want to hear those words. How could a man just walk out not knowing who this person was, anything about this person, and just end his life right there?
The killer was a popular real estate agent named Todd Kohlhepp. Police would soon discover 2 more bodies on the grounds of his property. But the 45-year-old had even more skeletons in his closet. The murder of 4 employees at a motorcycle dealership 13 years earlier.
Todd describes that before he leaves the scene, he goes back to each victim and shoots him in the head before he leaves.
In total, Kohlhepp had taken the lives of 7 people. The twisted serial killer had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade.
Getting away with those murders signals to him that there are no consequences for this. I can kill and I can get away with it.
Todd Kohlhepp had been unmasked as one of the world's most evil killers. When 45-year-old real estate agent Todd Kohlhepp was arrested for the murder of 3 people and the kidnap of another on his property in Woodruff, South Carolina in November 2016, investigators had no idea he was also responsible for an unsolved shooting spree which killed 4 others 13 years earlier. Journalist Daniel Gross knows Kohlhepp's story better than most.
When I hear the name Todd Kohlhepp, I picture him sitting in that interrogation room when he was initially arrested, and in his mind, he had those investigators wrapped around his finger. He was confessing to a murder that they were not able to solve for 13 years. And so just when I see his name or see his face, I always just think about his ego and personality behind the man that's murdered all these people.
So you pulled out the Beretta, and what happened?
Shot the mechanic twice. They had heard the gunshots in the back and were coming this way to figure out what had happened. I had 3 people in front of me. I dropped the mirrors.
Daniel continues to discover more about the deranged serial killer. Kohlhepp regularly pens letters to him from his cell.
I mean, as a journalist, this is one of those cases that you only really dream up. You know, it's sort of larger than life, almost like you're just reading a horror book or something. Even today, you know, he's in prison for the rest of his life. He's convicted of murdering 7 people. I almost feel like we're still just scratching the surface.
This killer's story begins in the Sunshine State of Florida. Todd Samsel was born in Fort Lauderdale on the 7th of March 1971, but his parents split up when he was just 2. Todd adopted his stepfather's surname, Kohlhepp, when his mother remarried, but his formative years were far from happy.
When we look back at Kohlhepp's childhood, we are almost ticking off all of the warning sign behaviours for serial homicide. We've got somebody who has real difficulty forming relationships with his peers. So he doesn't see children his own age as potential allies, potential friends. He sees them as competitors. He can only communicate and interact with them aggressively. He basically wants to crush everybody else and to come out victorious. We also have a history of animal cruelty. We know that he bleached a goldfish. We know that he shot a dog with an air gun. Here is somebody who enjoys causing harm to other people and other living creatures. It's something that makes him feel powerful, and that sadism is a thread that will run throughout the rest of his life.
The family relocated to South Carolina, but Kohlhepp's mother divorced again in 1982. The couple would go on to remarry each other several times throughout Todd's life. 12-year-old Todd was causing so much disruption at home that a decision was made to move him 2,000 miles across the country.
Eventually, he was fed up with living here and convinced his mother to let him go live with his birth father, who he really hadn't seen at all, in Arizona. And I think that might have been a way for him to try to see life in a new light and maybe get a fresh start, change of scene, change of venue.
But there was to be no improvement in Todd's behavior. In fact, in November 1986, the troubled teenager would soon turn to violent crime.
He was 15 years old, and the reports say that he had gone outside and found a neighbor who was a 14-year-old girl, and he ended up kidnapping her and taking him back to his father's house. And that's where he duct taped her mouth, he held a pistol to her head, and sexually assaulted her.
It was a horrific and unprovoked attack.
He threatens to kill her. He says, if you tell anyone about this, I'll kill your family, I'll kill your siblings, I'll kill you. I mean, scared her to death.
It's chilling, genuinely chilling, that he's so convinced of his own importance, so convinced of his own superiority, that he can get away with anything. He really does think that the girl won't tell anyone.
But the girl's family were already concerned for the missing teenager. Her young brother had recently been taught what to do if you need help in an emergency, and he had raised the alarm.
The rape victim had a 5-year-old brother, and he was concerned that he couldn't find her, so he called the police. And as he was on the phone to the police, his sister comes in through the door and then talks to the officers and tells them what had happened. But for me, the interesting thing is Kohlhepp's reaction when he was arrested, because his overriding concern was, how much trouble am I in? How much prison time am I likely to serve? Absolutely no concern for his victim whatsoever. It's all me, myself, and I.
In October 1987, aged just 16, Todd Kohlhepp was sent to prison for 15 years.
You know, a lot of people say that's your time for rehabilitation. I think for Todd, it was the opposite. I think he sat there and continued to harbor all of this inner struggle.
After serving his sentence, Kohlhepp was released on November the 24th, 2001. He'd spent almost half his life in prison.
So now he's 30 years old and newly out of prison, so of course he's gonna move back to South Carolina to be with his mom.
When Kohlhepp is released, he starts an image management campaign, essentially. During his time in prison, he's performed this role as a model inmate. Now he's been released. He needs to basically do some damage limitation in terms of establishing a new life for himself.
5 years after his release in 2006, Kohlhepp applied for a real estate license in South Carolina. Despite being on the sex offenders register, the 35-year-old managed to talk his way around it.
They raised that issue with him and said, well, we know you're applying for this license, but there's this on your record. And he submitted a letter essentially just downplaying the entire conviction.
And he basically explains this offence as a misunderstanding between him and a girlfriend. So he's basically saying, well, this was her fault, this wasn't really me.
In June 2006, Kohlhepp was granted his real estate agent's license. He opened his own business and on the outside was living the life of a well-respected model citizen, albeit with an unhealthy fascination for guns.
Kohlhepp was an avid collector of firearms, and I think this is something that he inherited in a way from his father, who also had quite a considerable collection. But I think for me it's about what firearms represent. They represent power, they represent authority. And I think if you look at them in the context of Kohlhepp's other hobbies and interests, they are quite grandiose, they are quite alpha males. So he had a pilot's license, he was into motorbikes, he liked fast cars. So all of this paints a picture of the kind of American dream, you know, the macho American character.
But this charming man about town was hiding a huge secret. In November 2003, less than 3 years before becoming a successful real estate agent, Todd Kohlhepp had gunned down 4 people in cold blood. On the 6th of November, Kohlhepp walked into a local motorcycle dealership called Superbike Motorsports.
Scott Ponder opened it, and he had a passion for motorcycles, loved to ride, you know. And so they built this whole business around this motorcycle shop, and people knew about them. You know, it was a thriving business, and it was a family business.
30-year-old Scott employed a small number of people, including his 52-year-old mother, Beverly Guy. Scott's wife had moved to South Carolina from Arizona to be with her husband. They were married in January 2002.
From a young age, teen years, he was really into motorcycles. And so I think early on in his years, he always planned on having his own motorcycle dealership. Like, he knew that would happen. He was just a gentle person. He had the ability to make you feel really comfortable. I think which is why he was so successful in his business, is because people that came in were immediately put at ease with just his demeanor.
In November 2003, Melissa had recently found out that she was pregnant with the couple's first child.
So Scott was not going to actually go to that first appointment with me. He was busy, and at the last minute, he just decided, you know what, I'm gonna go hear the heartbeat. I've never heard this before, and this is new and exciting, and so he surprised me by showing up at the hospital. I'm going to forever remember that day, because he wasn't supposed to be there, and he was, and we walked in and we were able to experience that together, and it was pretty exciting, you know, for them to find this beating heart and us to, you know, get excited over the fact that, yay, we're gonna have a family, and that was a good day for us. I never would have imagined that 2 days later, it would all change.
On the day of the attack at Superbike Motorsports, nothing seemed out of the ordinary.
So, November 6th of 2003, he went on to work, and I got ready for work, and my last memory in my mind, and the picture I have in my mind, is I passed the motorcycle dealership that morning and honked at him, and he was standing at the side of the dealership, and he waved and blew a kiss, and that's honestly the last time I ever saw him alive.
At around 3 p.m., Melissa received a call from a concerned colleague who'd heard news of a shooting at the bike shop. She immediately raced across town.
I got to the location that all of the law enforcement was at, and there was a good 10 or 12 law enforcement vehicles with their lights on, had the road blocked off, and I just ran past all of them and said, "That's my husband's business down there," and I just started running.
Before she could get near, Melissa was escorted home by police officers. Together, they sat and waited for news from the crime scene.
I was standing at my front glass door, just looking out front, and I see Spartanburg County Coroner drive up my driveway. So 2 people walked in, told me to have a seat. The woman immediately started talking, and she identified herself as one of the coroners, and she just said, "We had an unfortunate event happen at your husband's business today. Scott was shot and killed."
The bottom fell out of Melissa's world.
And I immediately started crying and said, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm pregnant, I can't run this business by myself. I'm, just sorrow. I started to think, his mom. I've got to call his mom. Where's his mom? I need to talk to her. Where is she? Where's Beverly? And that is when they told me that his mom had been shot and killed as well, and that Brian Lucas had been shot and killed, and they hadn't identified the 4th victim yet because he didn't have any identification on him.
The 4th victim was 26-year-old mechanic Chris Siebert. Chris, Brian Lucas, Beverly Guy, and her son Scott Ponder had all been murdered in cold blood. The identity of the gunman was a mystery. 7 months later, in June 2004, Melissa gave birth to a 10-pound baby boy and named him Scott Jr.
He changed everything for me. The first moment I laid eyes on him, I thought, this is why I'm still here. Because honestly, I wanted to have been down there at the dealership that day and just taken with him. It was so hard. But yeah, as soon as they put that little boy in my arms, I knew that was my sole purpose, why I was still here.
Scott never knew his father, and over 15 years later, his mum has never let the memories fade.
She told me a lot about him and how he liked to mess with my grandma a lot back when he was younger, and he thought it was funny. And she liked to tell a lot of stories about him. And it helped me just picture who he really was. During his birthdays, usually I'm in school, so she takes me out of school and we go to lunch. We just kind of celebrate his life, I guess, and not feel down about it, just have a day where we celebrate him and just him, you know?
The investigation into the quadruple murder at Superbike Motorsports unearthed no obvious suspects. Nothing had been stolen, and there were no witnesses to the crime. But suddenly, in late 2004, the police had an unlikely suspect on their radar.
It wasn't until my son was about 6 months old that I got called into the sheriff's department, and they said, "We have something we need to talk to you about. It's really serious." And my first inclination was, they know who did this, and they want to talk to me about it. So they sat me down in a room, an interrogation room, and said, "We took DNA from a diaper you left here a couple of weeks ago, and we sent it off and compared it to the blood from the crime scene, and we have DNA that does not match up with your husband's. And so we need you to tell us what's going on. Who's your baby's father? You know, how do you play a role in all?" I mean, I was taken so far back I couldn't believe it.
Melissa had turned from a victim to a suspect. She was so stunned by the accusations that she offered to have Scott's body exhumed so a new DNA sample could be taken to prove her innocence.
I want to say it took about a month when I received a call back from them. In essence, what they told me is Scott and Brian's blood vials were mislabeled. Somebody put the wrong name on the DNA. And so they were doing a DNA test of my son with Brian Lucas. Not knowing it was Brian Lucas's blood, they just thought I had had an affair.
It had been a year of hell for Melissa.
It broke my heart. It broke my spirit. I decided to move back to Arizona when my child was 1. I just figured it was time for me to start back over in my home area and kind of get us out of the public eye, because everybody knew who we were here, and I didn't want to raise my son that way.
The police had 0 suspects, and the murders would go unsolved for over a decade. But the perpetrator was hiding in plain sight. A disgruntled customer who'd taken his frustration out in the most extreme and callous way. The killer was Todd Kohlhepp.
There's records of him being in the store, and the shop owner and manager and some others apparently are making fun of him in a way, sort of a lighthearted banter. You know, they were known to joke around. And Todd being Todd, that just fueled a fire in him. You know, whereas anybody else, it's like, okay, if somebody's joking towards me or making fun of me even, you know, it is what it is. You know, they move on, right? But Todd's not going to take that from anybody. And them making fun of them, he felt that they had to pay.
Kohlhepp returned to the bike shop on the 6th of November 2003 and waited until no other customers were in the store. He then drew a gun and exacted his revenge.
And just one by one, Todd executes them. He shoots them, cold blood. Brian and Scott actually were the last to be shot, and after they saw what was happening, they started to run for the front door. And Todd was able to shoot both of them right outside the door.
I think getting away with those murders at the bike shop would have been really meaningful for Kohlhepp, because it signals to him that there are no consequences for this. I can kill and I can get away with it.
Feeling invincible, Kohlhepp would spend the next decade honing a successful career as one of the top real estate agents in Spartanburg. But in 2015, Kohlhepp's lust for blood returned. The 44-year-old had recently acquired a large plot of land in Woodruff, South Carolina. The 95-acre grounds would soon become Kohlhepp's killing fields. On the 22nd of December 2015, 29-year-old Johnny Coxey and his 25-year-old wife Megan were reported missing.
Megan and Johnny were a young married couple in their 20s, and they were quite vulnerable. They'd experienced quite a few issues in the past, drug addiction, they'd had their child removed by social services, and they came to know Kohlhepp because he offered them work, working on his property, doing manual labour. So I think he very much saw that vulnerability in them and exploited that, because Kohlhepp is a predator and he is very good at spotting vulnerabilities in other people.
Kohlhepp sees them as almost a perfect pair of victims. So he makes a pretense. On the 19th of December 2015, he says, I would like you to come out to the Woodruff property. I need some clearing to be done. Now, not many people are going to miss them. I mean, they've been living rough. They haven't got lots and lots of relatives around. He takes them to the property. They get out of the car.
And he shoots Johnny. He drops dead. He then takes Megan Coxey and puts her into a container and holds her captive for about a week.
In a bid to escape the clutches of Kohlhepp, Megan started a fire in her makeshift prison. Just like her husband, she was executed in cold blood by the twisted killer.
He said she was acting like a caged animal. And so he said, quite matter-of-factly, I put a bullet in the back of her head. So now he's got two bodies. He digs graves for them both and buries them on the property. Goes back to work as a real estate agent, as if nothing whatever had happened.
The police had no leads in the disappearance of Johnny and Megan Coxey. Once again, Kohlhepp had got away with murder, and 8 months later, he was ready to kill again. On the 4th of September 2016, a family made a call to the police to report that their 32-year-old son, Charles David Carver, known as Charlie, was missing.
He was just a caring person. He always wanted to help people. He'd give you the last $2 out of his wallet and the shirt off his back if you needed it. You know, he was just that kind of a guy.
Seemed like a happy life. Charlie would text his father every day or every other day. They'd talk about sports. So he lived a pretty normal life.
The last text I got from him before he went missing was about football. You know, it was just a funny cartoon, and I still have it.
Alongside Charlie, his new girlfriend, Kayla Brown, had also disappeared.
I ran into Charlie and Kayla at Walmart on a Saturday. We were shopping, and they were coming out, and he introduced Kayla to us. And that was the first time I'd met her, and 5 days later, they went missing.
In late August, Charlie and his girlfriend had been contacted by a friend of 30-year-old Kayla, Todd Kohlhepp.
Kayla had already known Todd Kohlhepp. They had met previously, and they had chatted online on Facebook pretty often. And, you know, at some point, Kohlhepp had offered for Kayla to work for him as well. You know, he was looking for work, and he knew Kayla as sort of a friend at this point.
Days turned into weeks, and Charlie and Kayla failed to return home. They had seemingly vanished off the face of the earth.
About 30 days into it, my wife and I talked, and I said, something's wrong. Don't know what has happened, but just had that parent feeling that, you know, it wasn't going to be good. And so we set our kids down, and 3 youngest, and said, this may not, you know, end well. You know, your brother may be gone.
The search continued into October 2016, but it would be in vain. Charlie Carver had been dead since the 31st of August. Just like Johnny and Megan Coxey, Charlie and Kayla's visit to Kohlhepp's Woodruff home would end in tragedy.
So they came together on the property, and without hesitation, Todd Kohlhepp ends up shooting Charlie 3 times in the chest, and he drops to the floor. At this point, Kayla Brown is just stunned. You know, she just watched her boyfriend get murdered in front of her, not sure what to do, basically silent, just standing there in fear. And Kohlhepp then goes to her, shoves her in the shipping container, and chains her up inside there.
Just like Megan Coxey, Kayla Brown became Todd Kohlhepp's prisoner.
The next 2 months, Kayla Brown is in captivity. She's on that property, no one's heard from her, no one knows where she is. Meanwhile, Kohlhepp is still living his normal life. He's going to work, he's working late hours, he's talking to people like normal.
I think he's convinced himself that it's all worked, that my fantasy has come true. I have my captive, I go there every day, do what I want with her, and I resume my, quotes, ordinary life outside. He is so obsessed with his own satisfaction, with his own personality, with that God complex of his, that he doesn't believe for 1 second that she will ever leave his clutches. The perfect fly in the spider's web. She is his and will remain his.
But this time, by utilizing cell phone triangulation, the police were hot on the heels of Todd Kohlhepp.
Then they realized that Kayla's phone is pinging in Spartanburg County, so they reach out to Spartanburg, and from there they learn property records, and they can see that, okay, this piece of property is owned by a man named Todd Kohlhepp.
On the 3rd of November 2016, 2 months after the disappearance of Charlie Carver and Kayla Brown, the police were ready to swoop.
We've got investigators in Spartanburg that go to Kohlhepp's house, which is about 20 minutes or so from the Woodruff property. And meanwhile, there's another team of investigators that go to the Woodruff property with a search warrant. And they get into the property and they start looking. They find Kayla chained up in the container. They hear her inside. They take a long time to kind of cut through all the chains and locks that had been on the container, open it up, find her, rescue her.
Wonderful video of them actually opening the container, taken by the police at the time. It's extraordinary. And they walk in, and right at the back of the container, right at the far end, there she is.
There was no sign of Charlie.
Do you know where your buddy is?
Charlie?
Yes.
He shot him.
Investigators radio this dramatic update through to their colleagues at Kohlhepp's home.
We have Kayla. We have Kayla in your property. She was locked in a container, okay? She has told us that you shot and killed Charlie.
And at this point, Kohlhepp just shuts down. He kind of gives this blank stare and he goes, I don't know what you're talking about.
Why did you shoot him?
I didn't shoot anybody, sir.
Okay, why did you lock her in a container in your property?
I was stopped.
She's on your property right now, locked in a container.
And they're pressing him on it, saying, we've got Kayla. Now you can either cooperate and tell us more, tell us where Charlie is, or we could go the hard way.
She's saying you buried Charlie's body on that property. So you're saying you didn't lock her up, you didn't put her in the Connex box or anything?
No, sir. I'm money an attorney.
Probably a good thing. Go ahead and put him in the back of your car.
Finally, Todd Kohlhepp was safely behind bars. Kayla Brown had been saved after a terrifying ordeal.
He held her in a storage container for 65 days and subjected her to the most horrendous sexual violence. He raped her twice a day on some occasions. She was simply there as his plaything to be used as he wished. She reported that Kohlhepp told her that he owned her, that she was his possession. And that is very indicative of somebody who is controlling, somebody who sees women as objects, somebody who is inherently a misogynist. So I think her account is a really valuable one, and I'm just very thankful that she survived to tell the tale.
Unlike Megan, who we know sort of put up a fight and was in very disagreement with Kohlhepp, I think Kayla did what she had to do to get by. Ultimately, she was rescued, and I don't know if she ever thought she would be rescued, but ultimately that happened.
But there was no good news. for the Carver family.
I guess it was that Saturday night about 7 o'clock. It was dark, and the coroner came up and said that they had positive ID that it was Charlie. That was a hard time. You just don't want to hear those words.
Days later, Chuck was able to visit the Woodruff property where his son's life had been so cruelly taken away.
Standing there on that gravel driveway, close to the same area where he would have probably been laying, I was just like, how could he do this? How could a man just walk out not knowing who this person was, anything about this person, and just end his life right there?
Lying close to Charlie Carver on the grounds of Todd Kohlhepp's Woodruff property were the bodies of Johnny and Megan Coxey. All three had been shot and left in shallow graves.
Meanwhile, Todd is already in jail arrested, and so the murder charges are already sort of stacking up against him while he's sitting there in those first initial days of him being caught. Todd is already explaining to investigators, hey, if you listen to me and if, maybe if we work out a deal, I've got a lot more to tell you guys.
Charged with 3 murders and the imprisonment of Kayla Brown, Todd Kohlhepp was about to confess to a crime that had gone unsolved for 13 years. The revelation would leave investigators completely dumbfounded. He revealed to investigators that he had even more to tell them.
He is just going in depth in great detail about the various things that he did, including, and most importantly, the murders of the Superbike Motorsports families.
That was one big building. I cleared it in under 30 seconds.
You what now?
I cleared that building in under 30 seconds. You guys would have been proud. I'm sorry, but you guys would have been proud.
And when he's describing to the police what happened, he's bragging about it. He's saying, you would have been proud of me. He's looking for validation. He's wanting other people to be impressed by him. And we see this often in cases of serial killers. Once they are linked to a particular crime or a series of crime, they want to take the credit for it. They want full recognition for what they've done.
I had to wait for the other. One of the guys wasn't there. I had to wait for him to come in. Finally, all 4 showed up.
The investigators were completely taken back. Kohlhepp knew details of the 4 Superbike killings that had never been made public. They decided to call the families of the victims, including the widow of Scott Ponder, Melissa Brackman.
I was walking out of the movie theater with my family, and it was Detective LaChica, and he wanted to know if I would be available in an hour, that I needed to be able to talk to him and be home. And I said, sure. And so he calls me and he said, we have a confession to the Superbike. And I break down. And I can't believe it. Like, are you serious? And he's like, this is not something I would kid with you about. And he started to explain, have you been following the news? There was a girl that we just recovered. And I said, I have been following that story. I'm like, how does that relate to, And he says, it is the same guy.
After 13 years of unanswered questions, Melissa couldn't quite believe that the mystery of who killed her husband had been solved.
I was everything. I was happy, I was angry, I was sad, I was in question of everything. Like, what was his motive? Why would he have gone, and why did he kill my mother-in-law? Why did, if he was mad at the dealership, why would he take out my mother-in-law? What's that about?
The community of Spartanburg, where Kohlhepp was lauded as a well-respected real estate agent, was stunned. A serial killer had been operating in their midst.
At this point, Kohlhepp has confessed to these 4 murders. He's confessed to killing Charlie Carver and the Coxeys. So he's got 7 murder charges stacked against him and the kidnapping of Kayla. And shortly after, since he's confessed, they don't need to go to trial. He ends up taking a plea agreement. If you plead guilty to these 7 murders, we'll give you a life sentence and you'll avoid the death penalty. And so he said, sign me up.
On the 26th of May 2017, Todd Kohlhepp was given 7 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each of his victims, plus another 60 years for the kidnap of Kayla Brown. 2 years later, at a civil hearing in July 2019, the victims' loved ones, seeking compensation from Kohlhepp's estate, were given an opportunity to confront the killer.
The whole time I was talking, we were engaged. You know, he wasn't looking at the ceiling or the walls or the floor. It was me and him. And I was telling my story of Charlie, how his loss has impacted me and my family. As I finished up, our attorney asked me what was the amount of damages we were seeking. I said that I wasn't seeking a certain amount, because you can't put an amount on a person's life. And no amount of money was going to bring him back. Because I wanted Todd to hear that. I wanted Todd to understand what he took from me.
Also at the lawsuit hearing were the family of Scott Ponder, including his widow, Melissa.
And it was such a powerful moment because she had actually taken the stand to explain, you know, what this has meant to her and what this has done to her. And she used the opportunity to forgive Kohlhepp, which is so rare to see, you know, somebody who destroyed her life in a sense and, you know, killed her husband. She took the high road and she sat there and she looked him square in the eye and said, "Mr. Kohlhepp, I forgive you."
Did I really owe him? Not really, but I just needed him to understand that, you know, what his reasoning and what he's using was playful banter from a couple of guys that joke around a lot, and that was the environment. And, you know, that was hard. The normal person does not go in and wipe 4 people out because they piss you off.
As well as Melissa, her son Scott was given the opportunity to look into the eyes of the man who'd taken the life of his father just months before he was born. Scott showed maturity beyond his years and is certain that his actions would be met with approval from his father.
I knew that he'd be proud of me, and my mom and the rest of my family that was there were proud of me. I just, in general, knew I was doing good for my dad, and I knew that even though I was nervous, I had to push through it, and I just knew that I had to do it because this is the last chance I had to speak to him and just get the message across, and that's basically all I wanted.
I miss Scott. He was so good to me. I'm thrilled that I have a child that bears his resemblance and that has picked up some of his characteristics, and it actually, it's good for me. It makes me happy. It makes me feel like, sadly, as it is, it's all played out in a positive way.
Since his incarceration, Todd Kohlhepp has hinted there may have been other victims in the 12-year gap between the Superbike killings and the Woodruff murders.
I definitely feel like this story is just beginning. I feel like it's a story that that the nation is going to be interested in moving forward. If we learn about other killings, you know, these are other families out there that are looking for answers, and they could have answers if Kohlhepp is willing to come forward and provide more detail that can lead to a discovery of a body or who knows what else.
Daniel Gross has been writing to the killer to try and uncover Kohlhepp's secrets.
It's a bizarre feeling. Every time I see his signature on those letters or just his little banter of, you know, hope you're doing well, or, you know, whatever he might say, it's a weird feeling because It's this gray area of, you know, you're a serial killer, and we're not friends by any means. You know, let's try to find some more detail here and bring some other families some closure.
Kohlhepp's ability to blend into his surroundings made him an exceptionally dangerous killer.
Even the sheriff, Chuck Wright, mentioned after his arrest that he believes he might have even met Kohlhepp at some point without even knowing that, you know, he's shaking a serial killer's hand. And so that just shows that, you know, Todd Kohlhepp was out there. He was in the public. He had built this successful brand.
I think for me what makes this case so exceptional are the different victim types that he targets. He kills anybody who is a threat to his sense of self. And I think it is that complete disregard for other people, and anybody who gets in his way is going to suffer.
Kohlhepp was a selfish killer who murdered 7 people for no reason, 4 of them in a petulant rage that left an unborn child fatherless. It is not only the lives he took, but the lives he left behind. A grieving wife, a distraught father, an emotionally scarred young woman, that make Todd Kohlhepp one of the world's most evil killers. September 1995, Anglesey, North West Wales. 56-year-old Henry Roberts had returned home after having drinks at the local pub. When he heard a noise outside his cottage, he went to investigate. Unbeknownst to Henry, it was a deadly trap.
Henry came out to see what the disturbance was and saw this figure in black. He had black leather trousers on, he had jack boots, a black leather jacket and a black leather /peak cap. The idea was to look like a Nazi officer.
The man in black was 49-year-old local cinema owner Peter Moore, who was armed with a commando knife. Moore launched an attack on Henry and stabbed him repeatedly.
When Peter Moore kills Henry Roberts, he stabs him 27 times. This is way more violence than he actually needs to end his victim's life.
Moore, in the end, pulled his trousers down and stabbed him in both buttocks. The final humiliation, if you like.
I mean, it was so astonishing. On the one hand, you have the respectable businessman. On the other hand, the cold-hearted killer.
He was a sexual predator who terrorized men in the north of Wales for nearly 2 decades and would go on to claim 3 more innocent lives in less than 3 months. That makes Peter Moore one of the world's most evil killers. The 25th of December 1995, North Wales. Most people were enjoying the festive period when news broke that a serial killer had been loose in the sleepy seaside town of Kinmel Bay, and he was one of their own.
I think people were very shocked for a number of reasons. It's the only case of serial killing in North Wales, and the fact that all 4 murders were carried out within a short period. The brutality of the murders as well it was quite horrendous.
The man responsible was 49-year-old local cinema owner Peter Moore, who'd killed and mutilated 4 people. He would also admit to nearly 50 attacks on men between 1975 and 1995.
I'd known him 13, 14 years, and I'd been to his home, I'd spent time with him, and realised that I didn't know him at all. And I mean, it was something quite evil there, and I didn't see the monster because the monster was so well hidden.
Even seasoned detective Dave Morris was shocked by the depravity of the crimes.
It's almost 24 years now since I arrested Peter Moore for those murders. Certainly in my police career, we've never had anything like that in North Wales before. He presented this persona to the outside world that he was a nice gentleman that would do anything for anybody, but deep down he had this dark side to him, which eventually took over his whole persona, and that was just one of a very brutal, psychopathic murderer.
This killer's story begins on the 19th of September 1946. Peter Howard Moore was born in St Helens in Lancashire, in the northwest of England. He was the only child of Edith and Ernest Moore.
He was considered somewhat of a miracle baby because his mother thought she couldn't actually conceive. And she had essentially doted on him much of his life. He had a close relationship with her.
She had him when she was well into her 40s. And I think in this way, he does differ quite significantly from a lot of serial killers. Many serial killers, you look at their childhoods, they're full of neglect. But in this case, it seems to be the opposite end of the spectrum. This was somebody who was overindulged, essentially. This was somebody who never faced any consequences for their actions. He could do pretty much whatever he liked.
Peter had a very different relationship with his father.
His father, Ernest Moore, was a disciplinarian, but he certainly didn't make his son's life easy. So he came to loathe his father and adore his mother, Edith.
He made some quite strong comments about his father. He suspected that his father was gay, and there are hints that his father had been violent as well. His father, according to Peter Moore, was an alcoholic, and Peter Moore didn't like alcohol.
In 1952, the family moved to Kinmel Bay, a small seaside town in northeast Wales.
The North Wales coast is historically a tourist area. In the winter, it's reasonably quiet, and Kinmel Bay in particular reverts to a sort of community village type atmosphere.
Moore lived in a comparatively substantial house, and his parents were relatively prosperous. They ran an ironmonger's, a family business.
The family was well respected in the area. They provided a much needed service, and especially amongst the elderly, they didn't have to walk far.
Moore lived a comfortable lifestyle compared to most of the other children in the area.
He was the son of a local shop owner. So I think this would have given him a sense that he was above his peers. He felt superior to them. And this would not have endeared him to the children of this particular part of Wales, many of whom their parents came from working class backgrounds.
At school, Moore was described as being well behaved, but he was a loner, and his height made him stand out from other children.
He was much taller than them. So there's that sense of exclusion from the peer group, but there's also a sense of feeling better than them. And I think his elevated height was something he accorded with elevated status. He felt that he was above them and looked down on them.
He also felt that he was entitled to a lot of things. He was a boy of vanity, and that vanity was to emerge as his life went on and turn itself into a much darker quality.
Isolated and alone, Peter developed a passion for film.
He had a home cine camera, and I think that instilled in him this fascination with cinema, with movies, with storytelling.
After leaving school, Moore went to work with his father at the hardware shop. For the next 29 years, his passion for the cinema was put on hold. Peter was gay, but kept his sexuality hidden from his parents.
It was something that he didn't feel able to share because I think at this time, in a very kind of traditional community, being gay was not okay. It was something that was heavily stigmatized.
Remember, until 1967, you could be arrested, convicted and imprisoned for being homosexual in this country. Moore was very aware of that. So although there may have been a certain number of covert relationships as he was beginning to grow through adolescence and into young manhood, I suspect almost all the time he concealed it as effectively as he possibly could.
After hours, Moore would frequent gay bars in and around Liverpool. He would also travel to London to watch sex shows. It was around this time that he developed an interest in sadomasochism.
One of the fascinations about sadomasochism is that it can arise from comparatively simple things: tying someone up, subjugating them, wanting to be in complete control. And so once that had placed itself in Moore's psyche, I think he took it upon himself always to be dominant, and what's more, always to use his dominance.
Moore also had a fascination with Nazi subculture and memorabilia.
If you accept that Moore wanted to control, there can be no more powerful icon of control than Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. The two almost go hand in hand. And there was certainly a tendency in the early 60s for there to be a connection between Nazism and sadomasochism.
His appetite to control men would soon turn violent.
Because of Moore's covert personality, this dominant male, he took great pleasure in homosexual encounters in which he would not only attack a submissive male, he would also demonstrate to other males just how dominant he was. Moore used his homosexuality in that isolated community to become a preying individual. He would prey upon vulnerable homosexuals who didn't know quite how to handle their homosexuality.
I think Peter Moore was well aware of the homophobia that existed in society at that time, and he knew that there was a sense of stigma, that the men that he attacked were unlikely to report those attacks. So I think he felt secure in the knowledge that he was targeting a marginalised group. And the more extreme his offending got, he really did feel invincible at this point in time.
Peter Moore's desire for dominance and control was escalating by the day. Soon his need for control would turn violent, and he began to attack random men in the surrounding areas.
He would go with whichever boyfriend he had at the time, and they would drive around the sort of rural areas looking for older men walking home, generally from the pub. He'd park further up the road, and as they walked past, he would jump from behind, normally with a rubber cosh, and he'd severely attack them. Some people were left very, very, very badly injured as a consequence of those attacks.
They were really brutal. People were beaten unconscious. So these were really, really serious physical assaults. And they were almost escalating, I'd say, in ferocity as his need to exert control got even greater.
Despite some of the attacks being reported, Peter Moore's name or any of the men he was with at the time never came up in any of the inquiries.
We were investigating those through the 1980s, but obviously we didn't connect Peter as the man that we were looking for. Peter didn't have any criminal record. There was no reason to suspect him in those days.
Moore continued with the facade as the son of a respectable local businessman, but by night he was a violent predator. In 1979, his father Ernest died. Moore had already been running the business, but now he was head of the household too.
He has to be in command, has to look after his mother, has to run the ironmongers, and at the same time wants to make a mark on the local community as a respected figure.
Moore opened up a video rental section in his shop, which reignited his passion for film. Eventually, he would close the hardware shop, and in 1991, he opened his first cinema. In the winter of 1994, he opened a second one in Holyhead, as fellow cinema owner Lewis Colwell recalls.
He gave the impression that cinemas were for families and children, and that's what he believed in. People liked him, people talked to him. He was very approachable.
He became a real pillar of the community in this regard. So he was the one who brought the glitz and the glamour of Hollywood to the rainy, Welsh, sleepy villages.
There can be no doubt that Peter Moore got a great deal of kick out of combining his passion for darkness and his passion for the cinema, and he was absolutely relishing the fact that he had a secret life that he kept hidden from the world.
Life was going well for Moore, but in April 1994, tragedy struck when his beloved mother passed away.
She has been the focus of Moore's life, the focus of trying to keep up appearances. He could never have admitted to his mother any of his secret exploits. gay relationships, cruising gay areas. But once she was dead, it was quite a different matter. Edith had been the restraint on Peter Moore. Without her, he quickly escalated into what he was probably all along.
With the house to himself, Moore was now free to indulge with his sexual fantasies at home.
While his mother was alive, he kept his interest in sadism and masochism away from the home. After the death of his mother, he brought that side of things into his home life, and there was all sorts of S&M paraphernalia in the rooms. Whippings and floggings had taken place in the property. The death of his mother had been like a release valve for him, if you like. He didn't have to sort of keep a cap on it anymore. That side had overtaken.
In the summer of 1995, Moore opened a third cinema, the Wedgwood in Denbigh, and revelled in the limelight.
The first time I met Peter Moore was when he was about to open the cinema, and he was understandably looking for publicity, and he was always prepared to pose for pictures and always prepared to give a quote.
He was hailed a hero because he came in on a blaze of publicity. The newspapers really, went to town. The saviour of cinemas, he was on the 6 o'clock news.
But beneath the veneer of the successful businessman, Moore was financially unstable.
All the cinemas he had were in little North Wales market towns. They weren't taking any money, they were just ticking over or even running at a loss.
Moore extended himself too quickly. 3 cinemas, all in a shortish space of time. He couldn't allow it to be seen that he was actually struggling. And he certainly couldn't allow it to be seen that he would actually close one of the 3 cinemas. Indeed, quite the opposite. He started to say, I'm going to open a 4th cinema, which of course he never did, because he was simply in financial difficulty.
With the financial pressure mounting, so was Moore's need for control and violence.
Well, what happens in many of these cases is that criminal behavior escalates. He's inflicting pain on others, and then he becomes more and more brutal. And then it escalates to the highest form of sadism, and that is actually killing the victim.
On the 19th of September 1995, Moore decided to buy himself a macabre birthday present to celebrate his 49th birthday.
And he went to a local gun shop in Rhyl, and he bought a very lethal-looking double-bladed commando knife in a sheath. He told me later that he'd been thinking of murdering somebody for some time. The pressure of the bank, the financial situation, everything, he just felt that he wanted to kill somebody.
With murder on his mind, Moore had his eyes set on his first victim, 56-year-old retired railway worker Henry Roberts.
Henry Roberts lived alone in quite a run-down cottage in Anglesey. He was somewhat of a recluse, really. He would go to the local pub, that was his routine. Peter Moore had a cinema in Holyhead and would drive home in Kimmel Bay. As he was driving along the A5 road, he would pass Henry Roberts every evening, and he decided Henry would be a good person to kill.
Moore then set about putting his devious fantasies into action and paid Henry a visit.
Peter Moore pretends to break down in Henry Roberts' driveway, and Henry comes out to see if he needs any assistance, and the two strike up a conversation. It emerges that they're both interested in Nazi memorabilia. So this particular event has given Peter some knowledge about his victim to be able to plan his next move.
A couple of nights later, Moore returned once again to Henry's cottage, but this time he was armed with his knife and was dressed for the occasion.
He had black leather trousers on, he had jack boots, a black leather jacket, and a black leather slash-peak cap. The idea, he said, was to sort of look like a Nazi officer. Peter caused a distraction outside to attract Henry out to the cottage. Henry came out to see what the disturbance was, and saw this figure in black.
Moore then launched a brutal attack on the defenceless man.
And he began to stab Henry. So when Henry realised that he was under attack, he turned around and tried to get back to the safety of his cottage. He wasn't very steady on his feet, and as he scurried back to his cottage, Peter walked behind him and stabbed him repeatedly. He collapsed near to one of the outhouses in the yard and died.
When Peter Moore kills Henry Roberts, he stabs him 27 times. This is way more violence than he actually needs to end his victim's life.
In a final act of depravity, Moore decided to humiliate his victim.
After he died, he pulled down his trousers and he stabbed him twice in the buttocks and left him in that position.
So it's not enough just to kill him, he wants to demean him as well. He wants to experience feeling power and control.
Moore left Henry's mutilated body and fled the scene. 4 days later, locals at Henry's pub became concerned when they hadn't seen him.
Finally, one of the regulars went to see what had happened to him and visited his house, only to find Henry Roberts' dead body outside the house. The regular ran back to the pub and told the landlady who was cleaning the windows to call the police.
North Wales police arrived to investigate.
Originally, when Henry Roberts' body was discovered, the police suspected a burglary that had gone wrong. But then, of course, they discovered there was quite a lot of money in the house. At one point, a 21-year-old was arrested, but never charged, of course, because there was no connection to Roberts.
A second man would also be arrested, but later released without charge for the murder. There seemed no obvious motive for the killing, and Peter Moore had seemingly got away with murder, something that gave him a perverse thrill and would only ignite his desire to kill again.
After that first killing, I think Peter Moore would have felt a sense of being back in control. Now that he has externalized that rage, he's taken that out on somebody else, he feels that he has some power back. All those other things that are going on in his life, his mother dying, his financial issues, they don't matter anymore because he's back in control.
Keep in mind, these murders are sexually motivated, and the sexual instinct is very, very strong. And so when someone kills and gets sexually gratified in the way Moore did, they want to do it again.
And that opportunity would come less than a month later, in October that year.
Peter took a night off. He went to Liverpool, drove there in his van, and he went to a club called Paco's, which was a gay bar in Liverpool. I think Edward Carthy was there.
Edward Carthy was 28. His partner had recently killed himself. Edward was obviously deeply upset and took refuge in Paco's. It was there he had the misfortune to encounter Peter Moore.
Moore is smart. He's not going after anybody. He's going after only people he thinks he can get over on. And he's pretty good at detecting who those people are.
Edward, I think he'd had a few to drink, and he approached Peter and started to speak to him. And Edward asked him if he could have a lift home. He said, "Where are you going?" "I'm going back to North Wales. Can you give me a lift back to Birkenhead?"
Edward gets into Moore's transit van and he falls asleep. Moore decides that he's not going to take Edward back to his flat. Instead, he's going to take him to his old hunting ground in North Wales. Edward wakes up and realises that he's nowhere near Birkenhead, and in fact, he's in rural Wales. I think at that moment, Edward feared for his life. And he tries to jump out of the transit van.
Moore pulled into the forest track and stopped the engine. He then ordered Edward Carthy to get out of the van.
Edward Carthy starts to panic, and according to Peter Moore, he said, "You're not one of those Nilsson types, are you?"
And Moore says, barely flinching, "Yes, I am." And he stabs him 4 times. And he disposes of Edward's body, hides it off the track in the midst of the forest.
Unlike Henry Roberts, Edward wasn't reported missing.
The family didn't notice anything unusual because Edward was quite transient. He would come and he would go.
In a space of a month, Peter Moore has committed 2 murders and got clean away with both of them.
Moore felt invincible, and on the 30th of November, just over a month after killing Edward Carthy, he was about to strike for a 3rd time.
Late in November, Moore is once again on the hunt for another victim. Of all unlikely places, it's on a site of roadworks on the A5, the main road across North Wales and into Anglesey. And as he's driving back to his own house, he happens to see a caravan with its lights on.
The caravan was a temporary home for 49-year-old Keith Randalls, a security manager from Chester.
He'd had a couple of pints in the pub and then bought some chips from the chip shop and taken them back to the caravan, where he'd sort of spent the evening then, watching telly. He'd rung his daughters and just spent the night in the van.
Dressed in black, Moore approached the worksite.
He bangs on the door of the caravan. Keith wasn't expecting anyone to knock at the door on that night. He certainly wasn't expecting a black-clad Peter Moore standing in front of him. He's barely opened the door when Moore launches an attack on him and starts to stab him. Keith fights back. There is a struggle. Moore, in the end, overpowers him brutally, ruthlessly, stabbing him repeatedly. Keith had defensive wounds on his hands where he tried to stop Moore.
And during the attack, Keith Randalls, according to Peter Moore, asked him why he was doing it, and his reply, chillingly, was for fun.
Despite Keith putting up a fight, he succumbed to his horrific injuries. Moore was unfazed by the vicious attack and calmly left the crime scene. But he'd made a mistake.
As he sort of went back to his house and was getting ready to go to bed, he realised he had a black clip-on tie, and it obviously come off during the fight. So he had to drive back to the murder scene to recover his black tie.
With Keith lying dead outside the caravan, Moore decided to violate his victim further.
Just as he'd done with Henry Roberts, pulled down Keith Randall's trousers and he stabbed him in the genitals. Another act of humiliation, to defile the victim, to render them an object, and also to increase Moore's own sexual gratification.
The father of 2 was found by workmen as they arrived for work that morning.
It's a very difficult one to understand, and it must be very difficult for Keith Randall's family to understand why he should be subjected to such a horrific attack just for doing a job and staying where he did.
The police were now aware of 2 dead bodies in just over 2 months. The body of Edward Carthy remained undiscovered in Clocaenog Forest.
Again, there was no obvious motive, there was no direct link, so a murder investigation was launched again. So there was 2 murder investigations running at the same time on Anglesey.
With no one suspecting the triple murderer, cinema owner Moore was free to continue with his deviant desires, and soon had his eyes set on his next victim.
Tony Davis worked in the crematorium in Colwyn Bay, a family man. He left home quite late, and I told his wife he was going to visit his aunt and take a meal to her. She had recently had an operation, and so he went to Pensan, which is near Abergele, where she lived. It was about 11 o'clock at night.
At some point in the early hours of the 18th of December, Moore spotted 40-year-old Anthony Davis at Pensan Beach. Armed with his knife, he pounced.
Anthony was a strong man and didn't give up without a fight.
Anthony fought back, and what happened was the knife had been turned on Peter on his arm during the scuffle.
Anthony Davis was stabbed 5 times in the chest and once in the back. He eventually died from his injuries. The heartless killer then tended to his own wounds.
He took Anthony's coat and wrapped it round his injury and left the scene with the coat still round his arm. And when he got home, he washed the coat and he hung it up in his house.
Meanwhile, Anthony's wife grew concerned when her husband didn't return home that evening.
At about 4:30, now the Monday morning, she rings the elderly aunt and says, "Have you seen Anthony?" And the lady says, no, he left at 12:30.
She suspected that her husband had been to Penzance Beach sometime before, and so she asked one of his brothers to go to the beach to have a look.
The brothers set off to look for Anthony. Anthony's wife has not just simply phoned his brothers, but she's also phoned the police. And in one of the most terrible ironies of this dreadful event is that the brothers and the police arrive almost simultaneously at the beach to discover Anthony's mutilated body.
Police found Anthony's car parked in the car park, but it was locked. They then discovered his body on the shore. The police knew they had to act fast to catch their killer. Dave Morris was part of the investigation team.
The senior investigating officer was aware of the reputation that Penzance Beach had as being a meeting place for gay men, so made an appeal to the gay community to try and identify who might be the person responsible for this particular murder in Penzance.
But at the outset, there really wasn't much movement, until finally the local North Wales police were persuaded to open an anonymous tip line for gay men.
We had a very good response, and one thing that became quite clear was that there was a male who dressed in black leather jacket and black trousers who had historically attacked men on Penzance Beach and robbed them. He'd taken property belonging to them, watches and the like. And this had been going on for some period of time. Another line of inquiry that we had was a transit van had been seen on Penzance Beach at around the time of the murder, certainly over that nighttime period. So there were two focuses to the investigation. One was to try and identify the driver of the van, and the other was to try and identify the unknown man in black.
Dave would finally get a breakthrough from an anonymous caller 48 hours into the investigation.
Somebody had called on the hotline and described being picked up on Penzance Beach and taken to a house in Kimmel Bay where he'd been attacked, and he described himself as being lucky to get away with his life. I followed the loose directions that were given by the caller, and I was able to identify Peter Moore's house. I was aware of Peter Moore from my time as a uniformed police officer. Peter was running the hardware shop, and we quite frequently phoned for police assistance. I was aware that Peter was a gay man, that he liked to wear black leather clothing. So I came back to the incident room in Colwyn Bay and reported that I believed I'd identified the house, and the house was owned by a gentleman called Peter Moore.
The police also had a breakthrough with the van that was spotted at the murder scene.
Two other detectives came in, and they'd established that there was a van hire company in Denbigh who had hired a white transit van to a guy called Peter Moore. And it was at that point the decision was made to arrest him.
The police had now identified the man in black as Peter Moore. On the 21st of December 1995, they now had a warrant to arrest the 49-year-old.
We went out in the morning. There was a team of 4 detectives, and we went in 2 vehicles. And as we approached the house, I saw the van driving away. So we fell in behind it, and we began to follow the vehicle.
Moore was on his way to pick up a colleague, unaware that he was being followed.
He turned into a housing estate in Abergele. He pulled up outside the house and just sat in the van. So I took the decision to get out of the police car and approach the van. I'd opened the door of the transit van. He was quite surprised. I identified myself, took the keys out of the van, undid his safety belt and asked him to come out of the van. We just told him he was under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Tony Davis.
Dave would also make a shocking discovery in the front seats of the van.
There was a hold-all bag, and when that bag was seized and searched, the murder weapon was found in that bag. I was quite surprised by his reaction, because I would have expected him to be quite shocked, quite inquisitive, asking why he was arrested. He didn't ask any questions, he just totally accepted the situation and came with me to my police car.
Dave was tasked with interviewing Moore for the murder of Anthony Davis, but had no idea he was responsible for 3 further murders.
And by now, we'd recovered the coat that belonged to Tony Davis. We'd recovered the murder weapon. He still wouldn't agree that he was the murderer, but nonetheless was charged with the murder of Tony Davis.
With the killer now safely in custody, the police made a thorough search of Moore's property.
A VHS video recorder had been stolen from the caravan that Keith Randall's lived in. As luck would have it, we actually had the serial number of the VHS video recorder. And when the search team searched Peter's house, they found this recorder underneath his settee. And when they pulled it out and compared the serial number, it was the actual VHS recorder that had been stolen from the caravan in Llangefni.
The police also found other incriminating items in his house.
There was a swastika flag that he'd taken from Henry's cottage as a memento. Tony's keys were all found in the fish pond in the back garden. So it was property from all scenes at the home address. He'd also kept the newspaper cuttings from the local papers of the investigations, so we'd been following those quite closely as well.
Moore is one of those serial killers who keeps things that belong to his victims, and this isn't particularly unusual because they want to relive those memories of the suffering and the murders that they've carried out. It really is incredibly chilling.
So I put a whole new complexion on the murder investigation. So once I'd finished my interview with him, and at this stage there was no admissions, one of the sergeants from the incident room stepped forward and said, "You're now under arrest for the murder of Keith Randalls." So that took him by surprise. He hadn't expected that at all.
With the evidence mounting, Moore decided that he wanted to start talking.
It was 2:30 in the morning, phone call. Peter Moore wants another interview. He wants to admit 4 murders to you. Will you come in? During that initial interview, he admitted the murder of Henry Roberts, the murder of Tony Davis on Pensarn. He also admitted the murder of Keith Randalls in the caravan in Llangefni, and then told us about the murder of Edward Carthy that at that time we didn't know about. My opinion is that he made the admissions because it was his way of regaining control of the situation.
The police quickly set about locating the body of Edward Carthy.
Basically, he was given an ordnance survey map of the area, which he circled where the body would be. And he initialed the map, and then search team went out.
On the 23rd of December, badly decomposed, the body is where Peter Moore says it would be. He tells the police, and I quote, "It's built up over a long time. I must admit, I've always had a tendency towards violence." He also tells them that he had a 5th victim in mind, his bank manager, who he said hadn't dealt with him fairly.
The police continued to question Moore about the other murders and attacks he'd committed.
He described them as a job well done. The fact he'd actually murdered 4 innocent men meant nothing to him. During that same interview, as well as the 4 murders that he admitted, he also told us that he'd been attacking lone males at night, mainly in the Conwy Valley, but the whole of rural North Wales and parts of rural Cheshire from the 1970s through to the late 1980s.
Peter Moore was eventually charged for all 4 murders. As he awaited his trial date, he decided to blame the attacks on someone else.
He tells the police that it wasn't him, it was Jason, his friend. He was simply there at the time, but Jason, his gay friend, did it. Jason was named after a character in a movie, not surprisingly, Friday the 13th.
Meanwhile, news broke that a serial killer had been on the loose in the small town of Kinmel Bay, and it shocked the locals.
In one word, horror. That a man who appeared to be a respectable businessman, who'd brought the cinema back to life in North Wales, could have been killing people and attacking people. It was very hard to believe.
You know, you get these people who go around fighting and God knows what, you think they might. But this bloke just wasn't that kind of bloke. He looked harmless. I never felt threatened. I never felt uncomfortable. When they said, "My God, Peter Moore was murdered," I think, oh my God, My blood runs cold to think I've been in the house, on my own with this man.
The trial took place on the 11th of November 1996 at Mould Crown Court in North Wales. The callous killer took the opportunity to revel in the spotlight.
Peter Moore's behaviour at his trial really is evidence of his sadism. Firstly, that he didn't immediately plead guilty, because doing so would have spared his victims' families the trauma of a trial. And also because he had silenced those victims. He was the one in control of the narrative. He was the one who everybody was looking at, and he was enjoying that.
The jury were presented with evidence taken from Moore's house, as well as police footage from the property.
The footage was such a strange, incongruous mixture of stuff. Items such as truncheons, German caps, police helmets, sadomasochistic stuff. And then the camera panned to show fluffy toys on the pillows and chintz curtains, and really odd. It just showed the two completely separate worlds that Peter Moore operated in.
The heartless killer continued to manipulate the story.
Peter Moore presented to the jury of 8 men and 4 women that it wasn't him that was really responsible. It was the mysterious Jason. Throughout his time in the witness box, being cross-examined by then Alex Carlisle, QC, that it was all Jason's fault. There was a memorable piece of cross-examination, in fact, when Carlisle said to him, "Is Jason in court?" "No." "Oh, can you see him?" "No." "You invented him, didn't you?" "No."
In denying what he did to the courts, he was reliving the murders. He was listening to the facts again in court. He took pleasure from listening to that.
He was enjoying his notoriety. And outside court, he didn't mind his photograph being taken. He just failed to realise the tragedies that he'd caused and the heartbreak that he'd left for families.
He played to the media. He showed his handcuffs he displayed to them when they had the cameras on him. Keep in mind, Moore's a nobody. So if he could have national attention, of course he's going to play to media and get his little bit of infamy.
The family were there in the public gallery, and they had to sit there and listen for 3 weeks to all of the details of the murder of their loved ones. I thought that was very, very cruel.
It took them 2 hours and 35 minutes to convict Moore of the 4 murders. One of Alex Carlisle's quotes to him, about him, "The man in black, black thoughts and the blackest of deeds." And that was what gave Peter Moore the nickname that he still has of the man in black. He was called, and I quote, "a violent and predatory sadist who was obsessed by the Nazis, and also, as the judge put it, one of the most dangerous men ever to set foot in Wales."
On the 29th of November 1996, Peter Moore was sentenced to a whole life tariff and was eventually sent to HMP Wakefield. He appealed his life sentence to the European courts, but was rejected several times. Even behind bars, he craved attention.
I received numerous letters from prison. Many of them dealt with his proposed appeal. Others dealt with civil actions against North Wales Police and some former friends of his. I think the letters were really a continuation. He liked being the focus of attention.
Peter Moore was a coward who took advantage of a social climate, who took advantage of the vulnerabilities of other people, and he's a very dangerous man, and he's exactly where he belongs.
It'll be many years before Peter Moore's is forgotten, and I think when people drive past in Kinmel Bay, they still point to the house where he used to live.
He still remains one of the most brutal killers in the history of North Wales Police. My hope is that we never have another Peter Moore in North Wales. He was a very, very, very ruthless man, and to kill people as a form of stress relief, I think, says it all.
He was a sadistic predator who terrorized the north of Wales for 2 decades, preying on those who were vulnerable. He brutally murdered and mutilated 4 men in cold blood, for fun, just to satiate his devious sexual desires. Undoubtedly, Peter Moore is one of the world's most evil killers. May the 22nd, 1997, Hammersmith, London.